Hello there, it's Claude Larson coming to you from the studio again, and talking about composition, but the thing about composition that I try to strive for, no matter what I am making, it can be as small as an ATC, a greeting card, it can be a very large piece. What I am always looking for is to have one, two, maybe three places in my compositions where there is some contrast. Now, when I say contrast, this is one of my sketchbooks. I call it my catalog of contrasts. So when I look at a piece and I'm not really sure what I want to change about it, I think about what doesn't it have and what would bring the eye to a particular place. So if I had a composition that was mostly warm colors, in contrast, I would add a cool color, right? So maybe with orange, I would add blue because it's complementary. I have something, if a composition is very dark, maybe I need to add something light. Thick lines, if I had a lot of those, I would want to add thin. If a composition is very bold, I would want to make an area of it very subtle. If there are a lot of large things in there, by contrast, I would want to add something small. If everything seems organized and arranged, I would want to add something random. If there's a lot of transparency, the contrast would be to add something that's opaque, tall and short, right? And this is just as you look at your compositions. If you have an area where there's a lot going on, it's very dense, have an area where there's something more spacious. Whole shapes versus pieces that are connected that can read as a whole, or just the contrast. And again, this is just little pieces of paper that I taped into my book. Something that's done fast and energetically versus something that's done a little more slowly. Saturated colors, desaturated colors. This is a big one. If you really want colors to pop, surround it with something that is desaturated. So all these are the exact same paints. This I added gray. This is them in there, like out of the bottle. Diagonal versus horizontal. So calming, right? This is uplifting, energetic, moves the eye. This is high contrast, so a royally blue with some white. You can really see the difference. Similar kind of collage paper, it's a burnt orangey color on red. So low contrast. If you have a lot of high contrast areas, the way you're going to highlight them is to have a low contrast area. Smooth versus textured. Smooth versus wrinkled. This is, in my opinion, something sort of balanced and quiet. And then this is something off balance. So it creates this tension in a piece. And that's what you're trying to do, really, is to get some tension. Where does this bring my eye? Why am I looking at this first? Because it's different from everything else. So this is same paint, adding gray or black, adding white. Things that are round, if everything in a composition is kind of round, you probably want to add something that has hard lines. Continuous, so the eye can follow it, versus disrupted, where the eye has to hold space for it and fill in the blank. Detailed, so very precise, and then very sloppy. This one I really like because I use the exact same colors. This I consider very loud. It's really up in your face. And these are the exact same colors. I think of this as very quiet. Contained, loose and free. Here I did right-handed and left-handed. So One looks more controlled, the other looks less controlled. This is, I used a stencil, and here I used a mask. Repetition, variety. This is a monoprint versus lifted paint. So there's not a big difference, but there is a subtle difference in this. Monoprint, I had paper on something and printed it on there. And this one, I painted the paper and then put paper on top and rubbed it. And you could see like where, you know, I don't know if this was a paintbrush or the edge of my hand or whatever, but it leaves a little mark. Analogous colors. So these are next to each other on the color wheel. Complementary colors. Hard edges and soft edges, right? So kind of blurred versus very precise. Cut, again, hard edges versus torn edges, right? This one looks a little messier. It looks a little softer. Some people prefer this. Some people prefer this. If I had all hard edges, I would probably include something with torn edges. All right, so those are some contrasts. There's more, but I just want to show you how I think about this in a composition. So this very simple little ATC, what do you look at first? I look at this line. Why? Because everything else is a shape, it's a solid, and this is different. That brings me down here, and now I can see, oh, I have a little pattern. That's different. You know, and it just starts to move the eye around, but you want to enter at the thing that's different. Here is just a small, one of my sentinels. And I personally, you know, I look at this big red shape because everything else is desaturated. And this is the brightest color. You can also look here because this is different. Everything else is a shape. Once I see this, I start to notice this. Right? Some people, you know, they look at the dark spot first. It's the tiniest little dark spot. I put it next to a very large, lighter area. That makes you notice it. Okay. And again, I think about this no matter what I'm doing. This is just a little greeting card that I made. And here I have these complementary colors right next to each other. Brings your attention right here to a light spot. This is light on dark, so here's a contrast. Everything seems horizontal. Here's something vertical. This is a greenish shade, so I put red in there as a complement. So every decision that I make, I'm trying to think about moving your eye around a piece. Now, this one, right, my eye goes to this first. And I chose this blue over an orange. So not only is this line different than everything else on here, it's the complementary color. So I really was looking for contrast. These two complementary colors, I framed them with something gray. Why? Because if this was a bright color, it would be competing with what I want you to look at. All right. Another one. What do you look at first? Some people are going to notice this first. Okay. Why? It's different. Everything else is sort of vertical. This is diagonal. Some people are going to notice this first. A light color on dark, a squiggly line, and there's nothing else on there like it. My last example. Again, some people are going to notice this because it's dark next to the light background. It's diagonal when everything else seems vertical. Some people are going to notice the scribbly line. I made this way more subtle, right? Because it's a gray on top of a desaturated color. You know, it's all about what you notice first, but when you make decisions in your composition, the idea is to include some contrast, make it interesting. If everything is desaturated, have one pop of color. If everything is dark, have one pop of light. If everything is hard edges, have one bit of soft. Here, you know, I have a solid and mostly solid and solids, but then I have something that has a texture, okay? Some texture, some texture, some texture. And they're achieved in different ways, so they're different textures. I don't even know how I got this, but I found it interesting enough to include it in a composition. I could have thrown it away and not found it interesting, but it's different. I don't have anything else like it on there. It's kind of reddish, so it kind of brings my eye from here to the red, which makes my eye travel to this red. Then my eye travels down here to this red. These are little red spots. So you can use anything as contrast. The idea is to keep the eye moving and keep people interested and into the piece that you are working on. Contrast is the way. If everything is the same in a piece, the eye gets bored very quickly. So I'll have a couple more images that'll come up after this in the video, and I want you to just notice, what do you see and why is your eye attracted to it? Is it a contrast of color? Is it a contrast of shape or texture? But see what draws your eye in, and then just consider that as you're thinking about composition. Okay, check it out. Feel free to leave me a comment. I love to hear from you. Have a great day. Bye.